Hey everybody, Texas Stroker here, Lance's Performance Shop, and what we are going to do today, this is going to be what has become sadly a pretty common problem, and the reason for that is the blended fuel we have today. Unless you're running around on a dedicated alky build for E85, something along those lines, forced induction, super low compression, etc., you probably got a more traditional mill, high compression, carbureted still, unless you switched over to EFI, which I think that's in our near future. I'm hoping that's something we can pull off this year. But what we have here is the old tried and true 3310, not a double pumper. Everyone sees it, says it's a double pumper. It is not. There's one metering block. It is on the front, and that of course is supplied with our accelerator pump. So the accelerator pump, interesting problem there. It is made of what? The diaphragm rubber. Why was it made of rubber? Because gas back in the glory days, and up through what, like mid 2000s, it was gas, and we didn't have problems. And then ethanol started being put in, and essentially what happens, if you did not know, ethanol hates rubber. It gums up your filters. It just causes havoc on anything that doesn't really factor it in. So we've got the classic issue here now where our accelerator pump diaphragm has been eaten up by the ethanol. How do I know to blame ethanol this time? Well, it was replaced very, very recently, and it was driven regularly, and what has happened? The ethanol just attacked it. So we'll get that off of there, but you can kind of see right there, we'll point it out here in a little bit, but we'll fire it up and see if we can get the trickle of gas going. So 1 second. Alright, so here we are. We've run the car a little bit. I don't know that you can see it well through the camera, but right there, between the pump cover and the bottom of the bowl, that is not a gasket, that is the diaphragm itself. It's sort of a self-sealing apparatus, and you can kind of pick up the moisture trail there if we were to run the car longer. Essentially, you can see the staining on the manifold better in person, but it's sort of just, you know, the natural satin finish here, and then you start to have traces of yellow. And if you note carefully there, concentrated under our accelerator pump, you can actually see the signs of moisture on the arm. This is just sort of some dust, and then that is wet. And the reason for that, it's getting on the arm. So I've got a clean shop rag here, and we're going to come up under here. And of course, the moisture that you see there is from the ruptured diaphragm. So what we're going to be tasked with today is replacing that. When you have and this one must be pretty bad, in addition to kind of smelling it, you can sort of pick up on, you know, the fuel, just raw fuel smell. It is a big time fire hazard, so that's why you kind of want to check all this stuff on these old cars before you head out, particularly with the ethanol blend. But what basically has kind of happened to us, the reason we kind of came across this one, which was again very recently replaced and shouldn't have been an issue, we had a situation where there was like an off-idle stumble. Nothing has changed drastically with the car, and you know, once you're kind of up to speed, you're kind of off of that pump shot, and it was no longer an issue. So you start thinking it's in the carburetor, you start looking around, you see the fuel leak. Obviously, if we run it, you know, and we keep giving it gas, we're just going to increase until you've got, you know, a trickle running down the runner there on the intake. But what we're going to do is kind of highlight the process. Sadly, this is something you're going to have to pull the carb for. Biggest point of advice I can give you, take advantage of technology. This is a situation, if you're a shade tree type guy, a DIY type person, if it's your first time taking the carburetor off, whatever it may be, almost everyone has a camera phone. Anyone else has a camera of some sort available, you can draw a picture. Document your linkage, okay? It sounds stupid, but you will not believe the number of inquiries you see online and forums and questions and whatnot. How do I hook this back up? Hey, I can't remember where this went. Just take a picture, you know, kind of document it, you know, by hand or denote it if you need to. That will save you a lot of time. You don't have to call up your carburetor buddy. Don't have to go online and ask questions that you probably are kind of embarrassed to ask. Go ahead, take the picture, write it all down, draw a picture, whatever you need to do, and it'll help you out in the end. Again, that's just kind of what we're working with there. So we'll kind of outline this, get the carburetor off. We got caught on a valve stem cap there, but it shouldn't be too hard. All right, so let's take a look at the basic tools we're going to need to get started. Might not be a complete rundown, but it'll be pretty close. I'm going to use a 3/8 drive ratchet, an extension, and a 1/2-inch socket. That's going to be for our 4 nuts, the studs from the manifold holding the carb in place. Pliers, that's mainly just for the cotter pins and linkage pins, whatever you may have. You'll probably want some needle nose pliers of some sort, or just really thick gloves so you don't prick your finger too bad. 5/8 wrench, that is going to be for our fuel inlet lines on the flip side. A number 2 screwdriver, preferably magnetic tip. Everybody has a different way of dealing with the fuel leakage. Anytime you take the carb off, you're going to have fuel running down. I'm going to try that. That is just like a Scotch tape container. We're not going to keep the gas in it long. We're hopefully going to be able to just recycle it for the rough start when we come back in. But a lot of people use cups. There's dedicated tools. Most people just use rags, newspaper, paper towel, something like that. My advice would be to use a shop towel. You don't want something that's going to absorb and become a fire hazard. You're just going to toss it. And similarly, if you come in with newspaper, that makes a mess. So we'll try that, see how it goes. And of course, right here, this is our new 30cc diaphragm. The difference between 30cc and 50 is pretty pronounced. If you don't have like a giant gallon jug hanging off the bottom of your carb, it's probably 30cc. Should be able to know it's usually stock. To upgrade a 30cc to a 50, there's probably some other things you could have done to tune it a little better. The Holley part number would be 135-10. And if you note, this is green and you're like, what is that? You got a gasket on there? Come on, what's going on? This is actually a new material. I think it's like what's GFLT, I think is what they call it. And essentially what that is it's not rubber, and it's not going to deteriorate and be attacked as fast. So it's kind of an alcohol safe material, if you will. Summit Racing, generally the best price on these, $9.65 a piece. Why do I recommend Summit there? Because locally, no standard part stores have these. I did get this locally. It came from the machine shop. They kind of build engines, race car stuff. And so they stock this. I believe this is from Renegade Racing Products. But for the most part, if your area is like mine and you don't have access to said machine shop, you're probably going to have to go online, which is pretty sad. Sometimes I think O'Reilly still has, like the Holley Carb section, but I checked AutoZone, Advanced, nobody has them. It's something they would have had to order in, and their prices were ridiculous. So Summit's usually your best bet. You'll probably be bringing some other stuff in anyway. And if you're not, it's a good reason to do so. But this is roughly what we'll need to get started, so we will do just that. And I can tell you, while I was over here gathering the tools, we've had some fuel dripping down from the pump. So we'll go ahead and attempt to remedy that now. Alright, I just mentioned the tools to you. We ran through those and I told you we had fuel dripping down. I don't know that you can see it with the lighting here, but rest assured this is a puddle kind of between the L and the K on Edelbrock. Right there, again, this is not a gasket. That's self-sealing. You can kind of see the glistening on my finger. That is raw fuel coming out, which we do not want. So once again, what we're going to do on this side over here, our fuel inlet, we're going to just use our 5/8 wrench, kind of get those worked out loosely. You will probably want some Teflon tape. I like to always kind of patch things up when I reinstall it. Over here, we're just going to take the linkage off. And again, make sure you take a picture, draw a diagram, something so you can easily put this back together yourself. All this time I was trying to show you the leaking fuel from the passenger side. I didn't realize we'd have a better perspective here on the driver's side. So if you doubted me, I said it was kind of there in the Edelbrock between like the B and the K, essentially like your two tall letters there. Then you can see the run down towards the center, those wet shiny spots that don't match the rest. That's raw fuel from our ruptured diaphragm. So there's kind of an angle for it. One more thing before you get started. Always disconnect your negative battery cable. If you've never smoked a wire, particularly on these old Mopars at the bulkhead, leave that thing connected. Eventually it'll happen to you, and you will make sure to never leave the negative terminal connected while you work on the car again. So once again, just safe practice, disconnect the negative terminal and proceed on with the repair process. Alright, so one more tip to maybe make this a little easier for you. We've got the fuel inlets off over on the other side. Fuel's drained out. That's just kind of where I like to deal with it. So we should have most of the fuel out of the carburetor at this point. This side, again, the biggest thing you can do is take a picture. But what we're going to be doing, obviously, we got to pull some pins, you know, to let everything slide off, get our linkage disconnected. When you do this, again, I would recommend using pliers. Try to get a firm grip on everything. Invariably, what will happen is you will drop one of these pins. You likely don't have an assortment that will include what you dropped and have lost. So the way we can prevent that from becoming an issue is do everything we can to, in the event that we do drop this, have it caught and visible. Just your standard blue shop towels here. If we pull this off and we just loosen the grip on the plier, somehow it drops down. Super visible on top of this surface. If it flies a little bit, this is kind of a pocket here on the intake runners. It'll kind of catch it. Keep that in mind, little things like that. One more tool you'll want to have in the event that something does go wrong, and it's just handy anyway, is just a magnetic pickup. So nonetheless, one more little tip there might make your job a little easier. Not just for an accelerator pump diaphragm, but really anything. So anyway, we will start taking this side apart, get the carb off, and move on from there. Alright, we have got everything disconnected. The biggest problem for me, number one, it's extremely uncomfortable, but number two, at least on the B bodies you have to lean in so far. Biggest thing is just that cotter pin, man, that holds in the throttle cable. Absolute pain in the butts. Nonetheless, what I want to do here, everything's disconnected. If I can switch hands here, take a look at this. Alright, so this is our accelerator pump down here. And essentially, if we come in, anytime I actuate this, you can actually see the fuel just, you know, coming out. That is a bad thing. That's how we know this is, you know, a failure. Alright, so here we are on the bench. This back vacuum line, I've had more trouble with that throughout the history of the car. I just always wind up leaving it on. It's a complete pain. I don't recommend it. It'll be whipping around anytime you move the car around. But technically, I would have preferred to have done this, you know, with the carb right side up like it's mounted on the intake manifold. Could have done it, but that wouldn't have been a very good video for you. So what we're going to come in here, we've kind of got it upside down. All the fuel's out of the carb pretty much. And you can kind of see right here, this should be this adjusting screw to the pump arm lever. That should have roughly 15 thousandths of play. That's kind of, I believe, the factory default. I want to say 15 thousandths is correct. You might need to double check that, but it doesn't need to be, you know, like depressing it already. You hear the suction sound now since it's, you know, no fuel, but it just needs to be resting there and then kind of quick to hit it with the 30cc is how you want that dialed in. So that can be done when it's back on, but if you want to make a measurement, go ahead and do that. But what we're going to do here, we've got the 4 screws here holding our pump on. If this is a time you're going to do more than replace the diaphragm, if you're going to change out your spring for whatever reason, just the diaphragm, go to the 50cc. This will be the exact same basic procedure. So we're going to go ahead and get these screws worked loose, and we will be back to check out our ruptured diaphragm. We didn't actually need to cut right there, but I did want to go ahead as reference and make the measurement. As you can see, we've got our feeler gauge here, 0.015, I believe you can see it there. And this should come in, and I'd say that's dialed in pretty close. Maybe back it off just a tad, but if you've got a huge gap there or you can't wedge this in at all, pay attention to this. You don't want this to be kind of depressed before you're going to be actuating the throttle. So what we will do now, extremely awkwardly because there's a tripod here, is come in. That screw was pretty tight. Same there. I don't think the screws had backed out, causing our leak. I'm pretty sure this is just a classic case of ethanol doing what it does to rubber. So you probably don't have to do a star pattern. I just kind of do for whatever reason by default in my life. But these screws do have a washer, it appears. It's been a while since I've been in an accelerator pump. But the cover is something else. Now, like I said, back in the day, you could go in and you could pick up from any parts store. Even a lot of times like truck stops and gas stations, you could waltz in and they just had a section dedicated to Holley carburetors, right? And not the case anymore. I guess fuel injection's been around a long time, and it's kind of sad for some of us, but you know, hopefully you have maybe like a local speed shop that can kind of help you out. If not, again, you'll probably have to go online. And bear in mind, you can order this stuff through pretty much any standard run-of-the-mill parts store. The issue being you'll have to wait on it anyway, and their price is probably higher. So Let's go ahead now. This should come off fairly easy. Did just that. So here's our bowl. That actually, just looking through the camera, doesn't look too shabby. But I will run this across some cement. I'll put it on a file, I'll put it back on cement, and then maybe even lightly sand it. I want that to be the smoothest, most picture perfect surface we can have. So keep in mind, again, obviously the end of the arm is going to come in here with your screw, and this is our diaphragm. And again, keep in mind it seals itself. Is sort of the issue. So we're going to pick it up. There's our spring, and let's see if we can identify. Sometimes they just dry out, and if that's the case and this has just been penetrating through, it's been pretty bad. You can actually see a weak spot right there. Obviously it should be like a uniform surface around the perimeter here, and there are two sides that are pretty well, you can see that kind of flop in it. I'm assuming that's where our fuel would be gushing in. Again, I don't have a great light over here to highlight it. I expected it to look a lot worse than this actually. But nonetheless, we are going to replace it. Keep in mind there is a spring here. So this is what we've got, and we'll just set that. Actually, we can leave it there. And once again, right here, the way you want to do these is you want the spring to be sort of, you know, cupped, and obviously that would not be accomplished by installing this side down, kind of nullifying your, you know, pump shot there. So you want, essentially think of this as a bowl. You've got half the bowl here, you're going to put another half here. That'll kind of make like your cavity where you're going to have your 30 cc of fuel ready. So do not by any means put this in, because that's essentially going to take away your pump shot. So I'm not sure you could even do it, but I bet if you really wanted to, you could. That lines up fantastic, and of course now we just reverse the installation process. But what I'm going to do right here, instead of just slapping this back together since it was leaking that bad, we're going to take this thing, I'm going to, you know, put the smooth to it. A lot of what the old timers did, I've had people tell me this with valve cover gaskets, transmission pans, everything. And obviously they wouldn't tell me that if it didn't work, unless they're just all trying to be cool with the same story. But I'm inclined to believe them. And what they said is anytime they had, you know, something that was giving them trouble leaking and everything, they would just run it, you know, slowly across, you know, a concrete surface. Is there any truth to it? Who knows? But it's what I've been doing, and it's worked for me too. A few times I've valve cover gaskets predominantly. Just run the valve cover across. Anyway, we're going to come in and we will actually attempt to replicate that and see if that will hopefully help prolong the life of this thing. So stay tuned and we will button this back up. Alright, so here we are. I have run out. We've kind of cross-hatched this across some cement, put a file to it. Obviously, anytime you do that, the perk of doing it on the cement floor, obviously, any shavings are going to be left there as opposed to drop into your bowl. If you're filing on it like this, obviously, you don't want metal going into any orifice in the carb, so make sure you kind of clean that up. As you can see, I guess it wasn't perfectly flush. We've kind of got like a different little crosshatch pattern here, but hey, what we're hoping for is that this thing seals up better than it was previously. So this spring was actually replaced not too many miles ago when we had to replace another failed rubber diaphragm. Now that one was ruptured big time, but I didn't bother to make a video on it, so we'll set that back in place. Alright, so with that said, once again we're going to make the bowl kind of have the cavity not completely take away the area inside, so we set that in place. And then again with our cover that we've kind of cross-hatched here across cement in the file, we're going to set it down. Again, the diaphragm itself is actually your gasket, so you don't have like another item you need to place in, but we'll put that in place. Then we're just going to start these screws, and obviously it's a good chance to inspect them. We've already done that, but we'll get this lined up, get it bolted up, and then we will be ready to reinstall the carburetor. Alright, so there it is. Again, just kind of taking your time going in a cross pattern. We got our screws cinched up here. You don't want to over tighten them, kind of push the diaphragm out, just kind of want to snug it up. Then put a little, maybe like a quarter turn on them once they're kind of, you know, tight. And then of course we'll assess it for leaks. We've got roughly the right gap here. Again, that's easier to adjust with carb right side up and mounted, so we'll play with that if it needs adjustment. That's that though. That is all you got to do. We will clean a little on the carb here, go throw it back on the car. I'm very tempted just to leave it off and put fuel injection on, to be honest with you. That's something we're going to go for this year, but nonetheless, we'll get it back on, make sure we got this leak free, and that way if we decide to drive it before the fuel injection shows up, if we can pull that off, we will be able to do so. So pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Hopefully it helps you out, and again, part numbers and everything referenced at the start, and we will have links down below as well. So stay tuned as we button this thing back up. All right, so we have got the pump, the carburetor I should say, sat back down onto the intake manifold. Obviously need to cinch it down. We need to reconnect our vacuum line there at the brake booster. We've got pretty much everything taken care of. What I want to highlight to you, and the way you'll know, is if you pick up a car secondhand, if you buy a Carb from a buddy, eBay, whatever it may be, right there you see that green line. That is of course our brand new 30cc accelerator pump diaphragm. So it's very easy to pick out. The black kind of blended in there on the part line. It just kind of looked like it might have been the casting or shadow type thing. This stands out. I'm hoping it holds up a lot better, and that's what we're going to find out. But didn't really highlight it because it's very difficult to do. One person, one camera, two hands limitation, right here, this is our throttle cable. So we want to slide it into place right there. Right here, that is that cotter pin that is a living nightmare to deal with, and that's why I got those 90-degree needle noses out. But all right, I think you can see it there. That's that pin. The good news, it is way easier to get in than it is to take out, but essentially we've already spread it. So what we want to do now, we actually need to come in, focus on the flip side of our linkage, and we want to slide this washer on, just like so, up against our nut. And then we want our return spring right here, which is again anchored right there to the head. It rests in that groove. Again, kind of hard to do this with one hand. Then we want to come in here with our kick down linkage, slide that in place. Again, that's sort of our adjustment screw, you can kind of see there. So it is in place. Last thing, really, we just need this return down spring sort of anchored into position like so. And what we want to do at this point in time is not that. We need to undo that, put our washer back on, then put that in place. And of course we're going to fit this clip in that same cavity, so you can kind of scoot that over just a smidge. And then right here again, this is much easier to do, getting on than off. Even with one hand we were able to pull it off. So, alright, so we have successfully completed this. We've got everything bolted back in place. We've got everything tightened up. We have no fuel leaks, obviously. Anytime the carb's off, you're servicing, repairing anything. Fuel related, most important thing you can do is confirm there's no fuel leaks. Obviously don't want to go cruising around with that. We got our vacuum line hooked up, I should say. Once again, the biggest fuel leaks we had after this, it's the inlets. Always have a lot of trouble with these 3310s, but anyway, everything is, as you can see, just bone dry now. And most importantly, again, you can see the green of the alcohol diaphragm for our accelerator pump. And I run my finger here, as you can see it's dirty. Absolutely nothing. It is bone dry underneath there for the first time in a long time. We got the linkage hooked back up. That is pretty much all there is to it. We're just going to throw our gasket, get the air cleaner back on, and call it a day. So that very well may be the last time we mess with the carburetor. It's looking more and more like we're going to try to spring for some fuel injection for the cars, and that will be quite the welcome change, in particularly given the issues that I've had since the ethanol was introduced into the gasoline. And some areas it might not be as bad. For me personally, it's been a nightmare. Weed eaters, small engines hate it, especially if you have like a good high quality product like Echo or something along those lines. The weed eater hates it, the mowers hate it, the cars hate it, the fuel filters hate it, the rubber parts hate it. It's not it's not been anything good for me. I can say nothing positive about it. But I guess on the flip side, hey, if it further justifies our trip into the fuel injected side of things, I guess it can't be too terribly bad. But everything's set up, we're running, and that's the most important thing. So pretty simple process. Again, it's a shame you can't do it while it's on the car. I guess you could try it, but it's not smart. So anyway, the main thing, we've got the accelerator pump diaphragm sealing, and that's good enough for me. So LancesPerformanceShop.com, LoneStarMopars.com. Hope this helped you out. We'll catch you back here as we continue on with more future projects.